Okay, this video is about Cicero, and it's about this book here. So the name of the book is Imperium. It's part of a trilogy. So part one is Imperium. Here is Cicero, the greatest of all Romans. Here's the author, Robert Harris. This was a best-selling book. It's a magnificent book. It's beyond good. It's a fantastic book. It was recommended to me by a viewer, and I figured, I'll check it out. I like Cicero, and I thought, anything with Cicero is probably good, but it was fantastic. I couldn't believe how good it was. I think this is a book that it's good for a young person, especially, to listen to this, because Cicero was poor. He was what was called a new man. He had no resources, no connections, yet he still rose to the top of Rome and became consul of Rome, and he's the greatest Roman of all time. Let me get this off here. So here is another cover of the book Imperium. Cicero was a fantastic lecturer. He was the best orator, ever in Rome. One of the perhaps the best of all time. He was such a great speaker, such a great lawyer, that it just captivated the audience, and it made him a lot of allegiance. He was magnificent at it. Okay, and Cicero had to deal with some pretty rough characters. He had to deal with Pompey. He formed an alliance with Pompey because it gave him some protection, and Pompey was the only one he could really side with at the time. He had to deal, of course, with Julius Caesar, who was a brutal genius. He was the greatest of the Roman generals in a country over 1,000 years, famous for great generals. Later on, of course, Octavian Augustus Caesar took over. But, these guys are a bunch of famous, badass guys, okay? They're very impressive. I mean, if you study Rome, these guys really stand out. Now, here's where Cicero was most impressive. When he was speaking in front of an audience. He was the best lawyer. He was the best political speaker. Coming from being poor, he was fluent. Besides being fluent in Latin, he was fluent in Greek, and he had gone to Greece. He had studied all the Greek philosophers and Greek orators. He was a very educated guy. He was reading all the time. So it's nice to see reading pay off. And he would win case after case, including when he prosecuted Verus of Sicily. Verres in Sicily was this corrupt ruler I'm not going to go into the details of it, but it was quite interesting. The book was very interesting all the way through. Oh, by the way, this is a guy named Greg Aldred. He's a very good historian, and here he is dressed up like he's Cicero doing hand gestures. And Cicero would do all kinds of things with his hands, because it would just add emotion and drama. Plus, often you're speaking to a big audience, and the people farther away might not hear you so well, but they'll catch part of what you're saying in the dramatic hand gestures that adds to it. And just another point I make about the Romans were brutal. I mean, they weren't even cruel. They were beyond cruel. They were brutal. So this is from the story of the Spartacus revolt. Crassus, who was the richest man in Rome, wanted to make an example out of these guys to all the other slaves in Rome. So it was the Spartacus revolt. Crassus, who put it down, he crucified about 6,000 slaves all along the Appian Way, the busiest road in Rome. So he crucified them. Actually, in the real story, he did them, 100 yards apart. But just to show you, how brutal it was. And this would be like a typical thing you would hear in Rome. So the Romans were very cruel. They got most of their culture from the ancient Greeks. And at least they were smart enough to admire the ancient Greeks. They were the best for philosophy, literature, theater, all kinds of stuff. Okay, now here is Cicero, and this is the condemnation of Catiline. Catiline was an aristocrat. He come from a higher birth than Cicero, but Catiline was a very corrupt fellow who broke rule after rule, rather frightening fellow. And you can see now he sort of turned the aristocracy against Catiline. And that's one of the reasons why Cicero was so fantastic to study, was he was very often playing from behind the eight ball, and he still did really well. Cicero, quote, "Constant practice devoted to one subject often prevails over both ability and skill." Yeah, a hard-working, well-trained person, that's often better than talent. It's nice to have both. Cicero, "The function of wisdom is to discriminate between good and evil." Yeah, a smart person says this is good, that is bad, based on having studied the subject and thought about it, perhaps having some good experience with it. Okay, and so somebody who's a real expert should be able to decide a lot of stuff. Not everything. Nobody knows everything, but they should be decisive about a lot of stuff. There's just a bunch of quotes from Cicero. He married a woman who was kind of rich to begin with as a way to get wealthy, and he had said, if you make the money yourself, that's going to take a long time. If you steal it, you'll get caught, and that's too risky. So the fastest and easiest way to become wealthy is to marry it. And there's actually truth in that. And if you study history, you see how a lot of families strategically planned all their marriages to make money. And, interesting. If I'd have married this one rich girl whose father was owned a bank, I could have retired at a young age. I would have had such an easy life. Too late now for that. Okay. I talked about he went to Greece. He was a serious student of oratory and rhetoric, read fluently, he translated some Greek books into Latin. When he defended people, he would focus on trying to generate emotion in the audience. Like when a Roman citizen had been sort of brutally whipped by another group, he said, the treatment of one of our own has been so cruel, so monstrous, that even the gods would weep to hear it. He would draw on the gods, and he'd create this giant drama and show. He would make a giant entrance, and he'd be all dressed fancy with his entourage. And he would like to do that, create a spectacle. He said, in politics, appearances are so important. Cicero had said that a good lawyer should be like a good actor. He'd studied all the actors, and he would try to just create this drama to stir up emotion in the audience to be on his side. And he would say that emotion is the key to victory. It's more important than the facts. Unfortunately, that's how it is with the peanut gallery. He would start out speaking kind of quietly and softly and slowly till gradually that he would get attention. Then he'd ramp up the volume and the invective. The book was just great. The author did a fantastic job. He really studied ancient Rome and knew it well, and has a fantastic vocabulary, ability to tell a story. Plus, when you tell a story about Rome, no one has a dog in the fight, so you can talk openly. You can't really talk openly about modern historical events because a lot of people become very offended. Like if you criticize Winston Churchill, a lot of people really love Winston Churchill, so they can't handle it when you talk about all the bad things that Winston Churchill did. Winston Churchill did a lot of good things, but what I'm trying to say is you can't talk openly about recent events with a big crowd because lots of people will get so offended that the conversation can't go anywhere. Versus when you're talking about ancient Rome, nobody's that involved personally in the details of ancient Rome. So you can put everything out there. The characters can all say what they really thought and felt. And that's partly what makes it so interesting. Okay, these are some old slides from the lecture I gave about Cicero and Cicero's quotes. So yeah, again, he was the greatest man in all Rome and ever in the history of Rome. And the great thing about studying Cicero is when you study Cicero, you pretty much learn all the main stuff about the history of Rome because he's right in the middle of Pompeii. He's right in the middle of the transition from the Roman Republic of 500 years into the Roman Empire begun by Augustus Octavian Caesar. And he also dealt with Julius Caesar, with Mark Antony, the whole thing. Okay, Cicero would always ask in a situation, who benefited from it? Cui bono? Maybe they're the ones that are doing it. The person who made something happen is the one who's going to benefit from it. Okay. Rhyme is a magnet for the ears. You should always put the key point of a case into a rhyme. Like, remember with Simpson case, if the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit. Rhyme is like a magnet for the ears. Okay, and then I'm not going to go into all the things he did because I kind of have talked about Cicero before in other talks, but if you want to study oratory, Cicero is the place to start. He was magnificent, and that was recognized back in the day of the Romans. Actually, here's one just great quote. This is a typical thing. And he was very dedicated to the Republic of Rome. Okay, here's like a typical quote by Cicero. The Republic, when we inherited it, was like a beautiful painting whose colors were already fading with age. But in our own time, not only have we neglected to freshen it by renewing the original colors, but we have not even bothered to preserve its form and outlines. What now is left of the ancient customs on which the Commonwealth of Rome was firmly founded? They have been so utterly buried in oblivion that they are no longer practiced, but they are forgotten. So he was a great speaker, protector of tradition, and he had said, to not know what happened before you were born is to forever remain a child. He was a good scholar of the Roman Republic, of the ancient Greeks, and this was that lecture by Gregory Aldrich. You can go to that if you like. It's quite good. Cicero and the Secrets of Persuasive Oratory. So anyways, that's all I got. I hope that was interesting, useful.